is class made of? So class composition or class component. Class. A class can be made up of the following: data members, members or data member variables. A class can be made up of data member variables. It can also be made up of instance, and within the data member variable, you have two types. You have instance variables, then class variables. So under data member variables, you have two types: instance variables and class variables, and the last type is constant. So now, which one is it? Instance variable. Instance variables are variables which each object of that class has its own local copy. That's why it's an instance variable. An object is an instance of a class. So once you create an object of a class, that object have its own copy of that instance variable. That's the instance variable. And what's an instance variable? Any variable without a static keyword. So it gets like the normal variable. So when I say string name, this is an instance variable. That variable. Instance variable is a variable in which each object of that class has its own copy. Those are the instance variables. So the modifiers could be private. Now you know what private are: private and age. So all these things are instance variables. Or you could just define them, they are what? Non-static variables. Once there's no static word in front of them, they are instance variables. And the other modifiers, which we'll be talking about them later. You could have final in front of this. Final in front of this. Okay, I'll come to that one. So this how the instance variables look like. And within the instance variables, so let's move to the class variable. For the class variables, they are nothing but what? Any variable that has static keyword in front of it. Any variable that has what? Static keyword in front of it. And you can see the indentation. This is slanted for you to know that this is different from what? This is a class variable. They're also known as static variables. And for class variables, they belong to all members of a class or all the objects. There's only one copy for everyone. So if a class has thousands of objects, there will be only one copy of the what? The static variable. That's why we call it class variable. It belongs to what? The class. What's the instance belongs to what? the object or that instance of the class. Then the four constants too, they are just like the instance variables, but this time they have the final keyword in front of them. Nice. So once you see the final keyword in front of them, in front of any variable, you are telling the compiler that this pi will never what? Change. This pi will never change. Now, when you read other books, not when you read, logically, because this pi will never change, it is reasonable not to make it for a particular object. The value will be the same. So let it be at what? The class level. So usually constant, you see the static before the what? Constant. Anytime you see final, you see static. Meaning because it's final, it will never change. Why are you binding it to one particular object? Whilst it can belong to the what? The whole class, because the value doesn't change. Whichever object calls this pi, it will still be what? 3.142. So usually being advised to make what? Constant what? Static final. And once you make it static final, it becomes what? A constant. We'll discuss how you call static variables soon. Are you okay with a constant? Anytime you see the final keyword, when I declare the final, and I don't initialize it, I'll get an error. All constants need to be what? Initialized during the declaration. So when I declare like this and I don't initialize, I'll get an error. And when the error will read, blank final field pi may not have been initialized. So if you ask to what? Initialize it. So I've initialized it. Now this is constant. Now if I want to access this, I need to create an object of this content class. Let me create another class. I'll give it static void main finish. Then I'll move. Sometimes when you have more than one packages and you want to move one class to another, you just have to drag it like this. Drag and leave it to where your destination. It will refactor and change the package name. So it has moved to this package. So now the content is now part of what? This package. I just dragged it from one package to the other. Now, when I'm here and I want to have access to now, because we are in the same package, I can have access to this what? Pi. The access specifier for this is what? Default. When there's nothing, there's what? Default. So when I create an instance of the content, and I say content dot pi, you can see the pi is what? Coming. But this time you can see some small f at the top there. Final. It's telling you it's a what? A final variable. Just look at those symbols here. This is final. The small f here tells you this is final. Let me try something. Let me just print them. I'm trying to run the pi. I'm expecting 3.142. What I'm trying to depict here is that you can see in this pi, the only modifier before the data type is what? Final. Now, because it's final and it doesn't have any static member, this is not just a constant, but it's also what? An instance what? Data member. And what do you mean by an instance data member? Once there are an instance data member, I need an instance of the class before I can have access to what? To it. Just like the other ones up there. Can have access to the name here. Are you okay? This name here is an instance what? Variable. And once it's an instance, you need what? An instance of the class, which is what? The object. This is the object of the class. And a reference to that object to be able to call those instance members. So this name here at this point belongs to this content. When I create another instance of the class, so let me make this one content 1. Content 1. So this is one copy. So this name here, so let me just give it a value, content 1. Then when I come here, I'll create another version, content what? 2 is equal to new content. Now the content 2 will also have its own what? Name. This name will be only for what? Content what? 2. Because the name is what? An instance variable. And each instance of the class will have its own what? Copy. So this name here is different from this name. This is for this content 1 and this is for what? Content 2. How do you know? I'll print it very soon. Let me add another content 2 dot range is equal to 12. Now there's something we call toString method. ToString. It is found within the what? The object class. You remember we talked about the object class. That's the what? The super class of what? All what? Classes. The super class. There's a toString method. How do you know? I'll just type toString. And you can see here toString. Override the method in what? Object class. So the last name depicts where that method is coming from. It's coming from what? The object class. So I want to override the toString method. This is what I just did. I just typed the what? Just like what we did earlier, to the name of the what? The method I want to override. I'm overriding something from the what? The object class. I said the object class is implied, whether inherited or not. You can see this class, if not inherited from any what? Object class. But we are overriding a method from that class. So I'm overriding this. Then I'll just print the content. So here I want to print the name. So I'll just say name. I'm just formatting how it should look like. Name is equal to plus name, then plus range is equal to plus range. So this toString, anytime I call this toString, it will print this for me. Let's see the use. I'll come here. In my sys out, I'll print the what? The content of the what? That class. Now let me just tell more about the toString. The toString is just like a display method for every class. And anytime you create your own user-defined class, you are supposed to what? Override it toString. There are some methods you must always override. toString is one of them. We'll come to the others. So when I say content2 here, or content1, print content1, this will automatically come and call the what? This toString method. And it will print the name of the content1, the range of the what? Content1. So let's try that one and see before we print the content2. So I'll come here, I run it. You see that it's printing. Let me comment this py out. Run it again. It prints what? Name, content. Where's content1? Okay, so content1. I didn't format it well, so let me just add some space. New line. So you see, name is equal to what? Content1. And the range is equal to what? 34. And this is the work of the what? The toString method what? Here. The toString method here. If I want to print the content2, what should I do? The same. So I'll just call the what? Content what? 2. Now, when I call the content 2, it will also print what? Its copy. So the content 2 gives us, so this is for content 1, and this for what? Content 2. We are calling what? Instance variables of the class. Each object has its own copy of the what? The name and the what? The range. So that's why we call them what? Instance variables. Or instance data members. Now, the final keyword which is here, we know the final will never change. We know it will never change. At the moment, it's just what? An instance variable. So to access it, we need a what? We need a what? The object. So let me use the content2 dot py. To complain, I need to put this expression. Unless you use it in an expression somewhere. Let me just try and modify the content and just, okay, let me calculate the range here. So the range here, I want to use the same content too. So this times content2 dot py. Okay, the py is long, the range is double. Okay, so I have to do some casting. Now when I print it, we will get a different value, 12 times 3 point something, and it's given us 37 because it's multiplying by the what? The pi. 12 times 3 is 36 point something, and the one is adding 1.4 is being rounded to approximately 37. So this is the instance what? Variable. But I'm trying to prove a point that constant, there's no point in making them what? Instance variables. Make them what? Class variables, because they will never change. Make them class variables because they will never change. And since they will never change, now that I've made this constant class variable, the mode of access is different. It now belongs to everyone. It doesn't depend on what? An object before you can call it. It depends on the class. So I can just use the class name to call it. I can just use the class name to call it. So here, instead of saying content2.py, I'll just say content.py. Instead of using the what? Content2.py, I'll just use the what? Class name. Class variables are called by what? The class name dot those variables. Static variables are called by class name dot those variables. Class variables and static variables are what? The same. A class variable is nothing but what? A static variable. Once you see the static keyword, it means it belongs to what? Everyone in the class. It doesn't belong to any object. No object owns it. It's the same for everyone. That doesn't mean you cannot change it. You can change it. But if it's final, you cannot what? Change it. Constant cannot be changed. So that's instance. So that's one composition. So a class can be made up of what? We look at two instances. Instance variables and what? Class variables. Again, we can also access this and for all. For all, let me make it for all. Now in the for all, when I come here, I can just use the class name content dot for all. I don't need any what? I don't need any object to access it. Because it's a class variable, I can just use the class name to access it. But that doesn't mean you cannot use an object to access it. I can also use what? An object to what? Access it. I can also just say content 2 dot what? For all. So here too, we are still using the what? The object to what? To access it. But you are being advised against it. If the variable is what? A class variable or a static variable, use the what? The class name. Even the ID will tell you that the static field should be accessed in the static way. And what is the static way? The class name dot what? That static field. So if you look at two things. So in terms of the variables, a class can be made up of what? Data members, member variables. And among the member variables, you have the instance variables, class or static variables, and the what? The constant. That's one component. Now, a class can also be made up of methods. And for the methods, we also have the same types. We have instance methods and what? Class methods. Instance methods and class methods. Now for the instance method, it's the same thing, just a normal method without what? The static keyword. Anything instance doesn't have what? Static. Anything instance doesn't have what? Static. So when I just say void display, and here you must define it. This is a concrete class. When you say concrete class, it's just a normal class without any specifier before it. It's just a normal class. So display, I'll just use out. I'm in the display. This method is an instance method because there's no what? Static keyword in front of it. And once it's an instance method, it can be only accessed, or each object will have its own copy. Now when I save this page and I come to the test and I call the content 2, I call content 2 dot display. There's one copy for what? For the content 2. So this one can call it okay. I'm not where I'm using this. Let me just I don't know. It already contains sysout. So let me just print it straight away. Dot display. So when I call it, this one calls the display. When you run it, see that it will print what? I mean the what? Display. It's just what? An instance what? Method. It's the same principle. An instance method. And all the access specifiers work on them. So when there were to be public in front of it, public, it means it can be accessed anywhere. If it were to be what? Private, it can be accessed only in this class. When I save this and I go out, I'll get an error. And what does the error say? This class, the method displayed from the type is not visible in this class because it's what? Private. But when it's default, it was what? Visible. When it's protected, let's make it protected. When it's protected, it's also what? Visible. It's also visible. So this is the instance of what? Same package, different class. Same package, different class. Let me finish. So this is one instance. Then this is the instance method. Then the other kind of method is what? Class methods or static methods. So static or class methods. Those ones are nothing by what? Any method that starts with what? The static keyword. So static void hold me. Static. So once you see the static in front of any method, it tells you this method belongs to the whole class. It's not being owned by any what? Object or instance of the class. So let me just sys out this guy too. Static method. Now, how do you call static members or static fields? You call them by what? Class names dot the name of the what? The field. So if I want to call the what? Hold me, I'll just say content dot what? Hold me. So I just call the what? The static method using the what? The class name. When you run it, you'll see that it will display static method what? Hold me. And still the access will still apply. At the moment, there's nothing here, so it's what? Default, meaning it's available in what? The package. When I make this one private, save, I come here, I get an error. Private is what? Private. It's not being shared by anyone. When I make it protected, and I save it, that one is what? Accessible in the what? The package. It's accessible in the package. Public is open to all. So you've looked at the what? The class methods. So the composition of the class, you have the data member variables, and among those variables you have three types: instance member variables, class variable, and what? The constants. Then when it comes to the data member methods, that one you have two types. You have two types: the instance method and what? Class methods. There is also another component of a class. There is also another component of a class. That's the constructor. 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 Now for the constructor, it's also a special kind of what? Method. You usually use it to initialize some stuff that you want to do. It's just like when you start your engine, you just be testing for your whether your plugs are in, this is in your fuel level and all those things. So you do your initializations in your constructor before you create the object. And it's the first method, which is called anytime you create an instance of the class. So for the constructor, we discussed constructor briefly, but I'll just give one example. Constructor is a method that should have the same name as the class. So when I type content, this is a constructor. It's nothing but what? A method that has the same name as the class. This constructor doesn't have any parameter, so we usually call it what? Default what? Constructor, or non-parameterized constructor. This is non-parameterized. Again, let me non-parameterized when I say Sita, I'm talking about constructor. Sita is constructor. So non-parameterized constructor. Then that one, so I'll sys out in non-param Sita. I'm in the what? Non-parameterized what? Constructor. And again, let's look at the access specifier here. There's nothing here. So what is the visibility? Package level or default. When there's nothing in front of the method or whichever data member, the visibility is what? Package level or what? Default. So here too, when we run this code, anytime an instance method is created, the default constructor is called. So when you run it, you can see that I'm non-param Sita. We'll discuss constructors. So a class, so we've just seen one constructor, but usually you see constructors to be public. Not usually. When you make it public, it means it can be accessed what? Anywhere. When you make it private, you get an error. Private methods are not accessible outside of what? The class. So when I come here, I'll get an error from here. And what's the error telling me? The constructor content is not visible here because I made it what? Private. So if I want to make it visible, I have three other options: protected, public, and what? Default, depending on what? Where I want my constructor to be used. And every object depends on what? The constructor. So if you limit the use of the constructor, your object will be limited. Now, once I've made it private, doesn't mean I cannot create an instance of it. I can create it inside the class, but I cannot create it outside of what? The class. The rule is very simple. Private means what? Only inside the class. Default is package level. Public is open to all. Protected is what? Package level plus what? Child class. So I'll go back and change it to public. So for the components, let me list them. So this one class is made up of 1 instance variable, 2 class variables, 3 constant, 4 instance methods, 5 static methods, and 6 constructor. We can have parameters. We will discuss constructors later. Now, the other two sections which a class can be made up of. One is normal block. So we usually say non-static block. Non-static block. You just define a region in the class. The non-static block. Now, if it's non-static, it behaves like any other block. What do I mean behave like any other? You can do anything inside it. There's no limitation when it's a non-static block. So let me just say I'm in non-static block. Let's run it and see whether it's being called. You can see non-static block is called before the what? This is the order of execution. So in a class, the non-static block is called before the what? The constructor. That's why this guy came before the what? This constructor. When you first created this object, the non-static block came first before the what? The rest. Then we also have the about when we run our code like this, we had non-static block, non-param, non-static block, non-param before we printed the content. Now the last block or the last component of a class is the what? Static block. Static block. That one, you just name a block static. So you bring the static keyword, then you label the what? The block. So it's just like a method without nothing. So just static, then you open curly braces and you close it. So that's the static block. Now let's observe how it works. So I'll just sys out I am the static block. I am the static block. Let's run our code again and see the output that we get. You see we get what? I am the static block. I am in non-static block. I am in non-static block. I'm in non-param. I'm in non-static block. I'm in non-param. The static block is called only once. Only once. It's called only once. Whilst the non-static block is called as many times as and when an instance of the class is created. So if the class has 10 objects, the non-static block will be called what? 10 times. While the static block is called only what? Once. That's just one time. The static block is called only what? Once. That's why here, let me just add more objects. You come here, I'll create more objects. Content 3 is equal to new content 4 is equal to new content 5 is equal to new content. I will save it, run it again. Now let's count it. The what? Static block is called only once. Non-static is what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because we have 5 what? Objects. So they do the same thing, but one is called as and when each object is created. So now that you know the power of these two, you determine which one you want to use. There are situations where you are building an application, you want something to be done only once in an entire lifetime. Others, you want to be done anytime an object is being what? Created. Then you determine which block should I use. Should I use what? Static and what? Non-static. So that's the component of a class.